training as a social worker makes him highly effective in maximizing compensation for his clients and allows him to appreciate the challenges and struggles they face as a result of their life-altering injuries. Robert understands that achieving results for his clients requires not only skill and intelligence, but also passion, creativity, perseverance, and above all else, hard work. Hello, Robert.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me, and it's always a great pleasure to support BIST and all the great work that you do. I'm happy to jump right in here and introduce Dr. Carolyn Lemsky, who's here with us. Hello, Dr. Lemsky. She is a board-certified neuropsychologist with more than 25 years of experience. I don't know the exact number of years, but I know it's substantial. Working in rehabilitation settings in Canada and the US. For the past more than 15 years, she's been the director at CHEERS, the Community Head Injury Resource Services of Toronto, promoting community reintegration of persons living with the effects of acquired brain injury. Dr. Lemsky's also been the director of the Substance Use and Brain Injury Bridging Project, a research and knowledge transfer initiative funded by the Ontario Neurotrauma Foundation. I'm told that Dr. Lemsky has trained over 2,000 mental health, addictions, and ABI providers in skills needed to promote the development of more accessible addictions programming for people living with substance abuse and ABI. In addition to her frequent conference presentations, Dr. Lemsky's contributed book chapters and articles to the neuropsychology and brain injury literature. And she is frequently invited to provide training and education and speaking at different presentations such as today. I myself have been fortunate enough to attend several of Dr. Lemsky's presentations in my own practice as a brain injury litigation lawyer. I and many of my partners have frequently turned to her for her expertise on the subject. So tonight I'm very excited to have Dr. Lemsky present on the very important subject of implementation of compensatory strategies after a brain injury. Dr. Lemsky.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out. And what I thought that I would start with today, thank you so much, Robert, for that kind introduction. It's very generous, actually. What I thought that I would start out by doing is giving a quick introduction to what the topic is of cognitive compensation. And while I'm doing that, if you have any burning questions for what you would like to know as the result of, by the time we finish tonight, what would you actually like to walk away with? The Melissas are going to help me to monitor the chats, and we can ask the questions and get your questions that way. So when we talk about cognitive rehabilitation as a whole, we're talking about a few different kinds of things. Sometimes people think of cognitive rehabilitation meaning that your brain is actually going to get better. And that kind of cognitive rehabilitation is actually what we refer to as restorative therapy. So it's going to restore the brain to be doing more of the functions that it used to do. We know that there's some kinds of restorative therapies that are really helpful. There's some kinds of attention training that seem to help a lot. Speech and language therapists do a fantastic job with language. And we know that people after strokes and brain injuries recover a lot in the first couple of years. What we're going to focus on today, though, are some of the other things besides restorative. So today we're going to be really focusing more on compensatory strategies. And when we talk about compensating, we're talking about that you get better at the stuff you want to do. Even if your brain injury has left you with some kind of problem, you still can get done the things that are important to you to do. We're going to include in that some environmental strategies, and that's where someone or something helps you to do the things that you want to do. and then behavioral, which is learning a new skill. So that's really what we want to talk about today. So, and I'm not sure if anybody's had a chance to do it yet. And I'm going to say, please interrupt me if questions come up. Does anybody have any burning questions, things that you want to be sure that we cover in the next, say, 45 minutes or so?
And again, there's a few options. People can put it in the chat box. Oh, I see Bob has raised his hand. So if you do raise your hand, Melissa Forrest will unmute you, and that way you're able to talk. We just can't unmute everybody at once because it'll be chaos. So Melissa will unmute those who are raising their hands.
Great. I'm going to take notes so I don't forget. So do we have a question?
Oh, I don't see Bob's hand up anymore. I see Wendy.
Wendy Scott, I saw, has a raised hand.
I might be the one to unmute them. Sorry, because I'm the host. Sorry, everybody. Okay, so Wendy, you're up. If you want to chat, you're able to. Wendy, are you there? Did you?
I am, but I did not have
Okay.
my hand up.
Oh, strange. It's showing up on our side. I don't know why, but do you have a
Okay.
question?
No, not right now, thanks.
Okay, thanks, Wendy.
Okay, I can.
Sorry, and
Others?
So there's a couple of things that have come up in the chat box.
Perfect.
One person has asked, memory impairment and recovery. Will this be discussed today?
We will. I'll talk a little bit about memory impairment and recovery. Yes, I will. If I don't cover the stuff that you're interested in knowing, ask another specific question. And is there anything else?
And someone else is just saying good evening, and they will be here until about 7:15.
perfect. Bob, I'm going to unmute you, Bob. So you have your hand up if you want to talk to Dr. Lemsky.
Yes, thank you everybody for having this webinar tonight. What a wonderful day. Dr. Lemsky, has there been any discussion with any government officials, provincially or federally, about through Ontario Disability being having the opportunity for pulse electric magnetic field therapy being allowed as medical assistance through Ontario Disability as a service I think that is have experienced it myself as a greatly needed option. Has there been any discussion of that federally?
You know what? I'm not involved actually in the discussions of what's covered and what isn't. So I'm a member of the public just like you are, and I haven't heard of anything about that particular therapy or whether they're going to well, I've heard of the therapy, but whether they're going to cover that as a part of OHIP coverage. I know that rehabilitation therapies, and this is a big gap, and we've been advocating for more services. And at Cheers, we try to kind of jury rig to get people the best services we can. But once a person's reached about 6 months after a severe injury, and once they finish with their clinic visits after milder injuries, there really isn't much that's publicly funded for rehabilitation services. So I know that Toronto Rehab has tried to develop some online services so that people can get access to the things that they need. And we at Cheers are doing things like today's seminar and teaching our outreach workers how to help folks compensate better.
Well,
But it's a gap. It's a big gap.
thank you for your response. But I'd just like to mention, I thought I'd get it in early while I had a chance in case because meetings always run late, that the Ontario Disability are very limited. We don't have access to pulse electric magnetic therapy, PMF therapy, acupuncture, chiropractic, and we can go on and on. Myself, I was fortunate to have 6 months PMF therapy, and it helped me tremendously. It helped me function from day to day tremendously. This is something that we should talk about, on a provincial level, and I'll leave my comment at that. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I'm glad to hear that it was successful for you. Yeah, I'll be looking really with a lot of interest at the articles that come out about it, the evidence that comes out about it.
Yeah, thank you, Bob.
Talking about something that's a little bit more low tech. Is there anything else, Melissa, before we move on?
Yes, so there's a few more actually, but 4 came in really quickly. The first one is, what kind of therapies can a neuropsych offer for mild TBI, especially for those with previous issues that have now exacerbated?
Okay, so, and with mild TBI, a lot of times the issues are things like balance or headache, and dizziness and balance both, and sensitivity to noise and sensitivity to light. So we're going to talk a little bit about, so I'm not going to be doing restorative because that would be kind of a restorative therapy. And tonight we're going to be talking more about compensation. But the things that are really relevant for mild traumatic brain injury particularly is that folks find that they're fatigued and they have mental fog. And so as we go along, I'll be talking a little bit about how you can use some of these strategies to help support or speed up your recovery. And again, you can ask again if we haven't answered your questions. What else did you have there, Melissa?
So there's a couple more that we actually may be talking about it later on in the presentation, but the first is, along with memory, specifically, is there anything that would help recover facial recognition?
Ah, okay. Actually, that's an area where there hasn't been very much research at all, but I've known some folks with that issue. And, right, the compensation for that, unfortunately, is basically to get a person to talk to you so that you can hear their voice. And very often, even if facial recognition is disrupted, a person can actually recognize voice and name. And so if there's somebody there that you can't talk, it's having the short speech of, gee, I have a little trouble with faces. Can you speak to me? So that's the compensation strategy. I know that some folks have worked at studying pictures and parts of pictures and seeing if from looking at the parts, you can actually start to recognize the faces. But it's not an area that's been well studied. So there isn't a lot of evidence-based treatment.
Thank you, Dr. Lemsky. The next one is, do you know if light therapy is helpful, and where would I get that? Like, where can you?
Absolutely, light therapy is helpful. It's most helpful though when the daylight, when we would ordinarily, I'm not sure if we're going to do it this year, but when we ordinarily would switch to daylight savings time. So usually people use light therapy from daylight savings time until you spring forward in the spring. And there's very good evidence that it helps with sleep and mood. And because sleep and mood are better, it actually helps with fatigue. And so and also with cognition and thinking and memory. And it's pretty simple. You have to just make sure that you're getting a blue light, one that actually is a good quality medical light, that you're using it above your head so that it's sort of shining down on you. You use it within an hour of waking up in the morning and for 20 minutes, and you do that consistently. And you do that from fall behind to spring forward. When you have more daylight hours, the way you proxy that is you go out in the sun within an hour of waking up and spend 20 minutes next to a bright window or going outdoors. And that helps to set your circadian rhythm, and there's very good evidence that it really helps with cognition.
Thank you, Dr. Lemsky. So a whole bunch of questions are rolling in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask two more. And then I'm wondering, do you want to start into the presentation a bit and then get back to questions?
I will. And what's happening now is you guys are giving me food for thought. So I know what kinds of things are on folks' minds. So as I go through my presentation, I'll be able to stop and emphasize some of those things that people are finding important. Okay?
Perfect. So I'm going to choose the two that are at the top. The first one is, what is the difference between what is the difference in restorative and childhood injury compared to adult injury? So I suppose they're asking, what is the difference between like recovery rates, or you know, the differences in the process of recovery between children and adults?
Oh, that's really complicated. And that might be something that we want to return to at the end if we have time. But the short answer is that your brain develops in very predictable stages. And the information and the experiences that you have while you're growing up is what forms your brain to its adult form. So your brain is kind of tuned in at different developmental stages to learn different kinds of stuff. So as an infant, what your brain is mostly learning is how to sort out sensory information. So things start out really confusing, and then what an infant child is learning is what things look like, and what they're and how they feel, and just all of the sensory integration is happening then. And all the other thing that's really happening at the very young age is learning language. And what you might not know is that there's this kind of critical period for learning language that begins when a child is born. And then by the time a child reaches about 10 or 11 or 12, they've really acquired most of the language they're going to have. And so if you learn a new language after that, you're likely to have an accent. You're likely to be able to hear, sometimes maybe a little older, but you'll likely be able to hear that you weren't raised with that language. And that's because the brain has started to sort of move on to other cognitive tasks. So the critical period from learning language is really kind of from infancy to somewhere in kind of early adolescence. And then from adolescence forward, the brain starts to concentrate on learning executive skills. So learning how to regulate your emotions and learning how to look ahead and make good judgments. And that critical period doesn't end until you're 25, 26. And that's when it's really easy to learn sort of flexible thinking. But throughout your lifespan, you're able to learn new motor skills and you're able to learn new cognitive routines. So that doesn't change. So when a child is injured young, sometimes depending on how they're injured, and they might be injured during a period of critical development, and it might make it more difficult, for example, to learn language, or it might make it difficult to learn certain skills. And we know that if you're injured in adolescence, it might make it more difficult to learn those executive skills that allow you to sort of organize your behavior. So when a person is injured as an adult, those things might be injured, but they often have their adult identity and their adult behavior patterns and all of those things to rely on. But it's a complicated question, and it really depends on the person, it depends on the nature of the injury, and it depends on the timing. I hope that was understandable.
Thank you. Yeah, it's very complicated.
That is complicated, yeah.
But I think that was a good, sorry about that, excuse my background. So the other question, just before we get back into the presentation, is what kind of treatment should one seek regarding PTSD due to moderate, severe TBI?
The same treatments, I was just doing a literature review on this, as it turns out the same treatments that help people without traumatic brain injury help people who have traumatic brain injury. And so there's a few evidence-based treatments. The one that is sometimes difficult after brain injury is the one that's related to eye movement. It's Emdr Eye Movement, Desensitization Therapy. And that one is kind of hard for some people because it's hard to move your eyes quickly, and that's what's required for the therapy, and that kind of sometimes makes people feel nauseated. So that's a good, it works. There's an evidence base for it, but sometimes people with severe brain injuries don't do well with it. There's something called cognitive restructuring therapy, which helps you to understand the nature of your experiences and to think differently about them and to cope with them better. And that's very effective. And then there's exposure therapy, where you actually learn how to feel better even when you're in the presence of something that usually would make you anxious. So for example, if you were injured in a car accident, you very slowly learn how to feel more relaxed in a car by getting more exposed to that situation. So any of those therapies can be really helpful.
Thank you, Dr. Lemsky. So yeah, I think that we're gonna head into the presentation.
Let's head into the
and then we'll come
presentation.
back. Thank you.
So remember, today's conversation is supposed to be about, can you see my slides, by the way? Okay, I just want to make sure. So today's conversation is supposed to be about compensation strategies. Now, again, we're not talking about therapy that necessarily improves the brain, because what we know is after the first couple of years, it's possible to do therapy to help a limb that isn't working well to become more active. There's a few therapies that work even well after treatment. But these other things that we're going to talk about that really improve a person's life in the period after a year or two after injury, or while you're recovering from a mild injury, that stuff is really more kind of a way of compensating for the problems that you might have. So a lot of times people ask me, which is the best strategy to use for compensating for a problem, a cognitive problem? And if you think about the answer for yourself, the real answer is that it's the one that you actually use. Now, a lot of people will tend to get advice or to think, you know, I'm really going to get organized. And they might have a day timer and a phone and a wall calendar and a bunch of sticky notes. And they might use a whole bunch of strategies all at once. And what I know from years and years and years of experience is that really, as we go forward, simple is better. The straightforward thing is the thing that works. So that's why I have here less is more. So when you're thinking about these cognitive strategies, I'm going to be giving you a lot of ideas possibly, or as we talk about it, you might be giving the group some ideas. And really the thing to do is to start with one thing at a time and try it and build on that and build on your success. It's very, very tempting to get very elaborate quickly, but in the end, most of the time it leads to a bit of frustration. There's another really, 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 really important thing about cognitive compensation, and that is using routines. Now, for most of us, you know, after a brain injury, just getting through your day can be more of a challenge. If you have a headache, if you have fatigue, if you have dizziness, anything of that kind, or if you're having trouble with memory or coordination, everything is much more of a challenge. And so just getting through the day to day can be more time consuming and more effortful. So one of the things that really gets you through and helps you to conserve energy and to make things work better is having a good routine. Doing the same, making a decision very consciously about the best way to do something. And then being a little disciplined about practicing it that way over and over again. So you have a morning routine where you kind of do things in the same order and the same way each day. And the more routine that you can do, the less brain power you have to use because it becomes more of a habit and it becomes more automatic. And that automatic behavior saves you time, it saves you energy, and it keeps you from being fatigued. It also helps you to make progress. So as we talk about the different strategies that we're going to talk about, it's really important to consider, what can I build into my regular everyday routines that's going to be helpful in getting through the day. So when you're building your routine, you start simple. You have to be clear about what the goal of the routine is. And we'll talk more about that as we go along. And then you want to do something that I refer to as, or behavior psychologists that refer to as, reducing friction. And what does that mean? Well, it means making whatever you want to do just as easy as possible. So the one example that a psychologist I know uses is that she wanted to get up early in the morning and go jogging, which is a very virtuous thing to want to do. And a lot of us would love to do that, except that it's hard to wake up early in the morning, and it's hard to, I mean, if you think about it, you have to get up, and do you want to have something do you want to do it on a full stomach? Do you want to do it on an empty stomach? And what she decided was that, just to make it as easy as possible, she was just going to sleep in the clothes she was going to run in. So nice t-shirt, and she was going to sleep in her running pants. And so that way, all she has to do is get up in the morning, put on her shoes, and go out the door. And that's an example of just making it so easy that there are no barriers to come up against. So for a lot of us, using compensation strategies can feel like, it can feel like a lot of effort. Making an appointment or writing down an appointment can feel like a lot of effort. So the thing to do in most cases is to figure out what is the easiest, most straightforward way to do it. Invest time in learning that way and stick to it so that you reduce the friction in getting it done. One big example in reducing friction, I don't know if any of you guys have had this issue. I do, especially now. I don't leave the house as much as I used to. So now when I have to leave the house, I'm often scrambling to figure out, okay, so what belongs in my pocket? What do I have to take with me? And I know this about myself. So the night before, I think through, where do I have to go? What do I have to do? And I make sure that I keep my purse in the same place, my keys in the same place, and we'll talk more about this as we go along, so that it's as easy as possible. I might even pour out my little packet of oatmeal and have it in a bowl ready for me. So it's just very easy to get out the door. So reducing friction is an important step. And then sometimes it's just you get help to get started, right? So having somebody walk through your routines with you or to cue your routine sometimes will help you to get started in building a good set of cognitive compensations. So again, start very simple. Make a specific SMART goal. We'll talk about that. Reduce the friction, make it easy, and then get help to get started. So what are the different kinds of cognitive compensations? And I'm just going to talk about those right now. So reminders are a very common thing if you're having difficulty with memory. So, if you need a reminder for something, you can just ask someone, hey, remind me when, but believe it or not, that's the least reliable to ask somebody else to remind you of something. So what you can do is arrange your environment. So you put something in a place where you can see it, right? When I go someplace, I always make sure that if I want to take something with me, I have my car keys sitting by it, because I can't leave without my car keys. I will take what I need to take with me. You can wear a rubber band on your hand, on your finger like this, saying, don't forget. I know a lot of people write things in there on their hands. Now, reminders are great, but they're kind of one-shot deal. They work for that one thing. So thinking about what would work for a routine. Well, memory aids work better for routines. So here's an example of a memory aid. I see it came out a little bit blurry, but that's a medication dosette. So A medication does a lot of things. It gets your medicine completely organized, but it also acts as a reminder. You don't have to think through now which pill and how many do I take of these in the morning and how do I do that? You have that all taken care of. You've reduced the friction, you've made it easy, and it's all laid out for you. And you're taking the medication when the time is right. So a memory aid might include the memory, a medication organizer, but it can also include like a recording that you make on your phone, Post-it notes, checklists, appointment cards. All of those things can be memory aids. And of course, technology. Now, the thing about technology is that it can be your best friend. It can also be your worst enemy. Because sometimes you get used to doing things one way on the phone, and then Apple decides they're going to make it pretty or do something different, and then it looks different and you have to learn how to do it all over again. So what I usually suggest to folks is that you find the simple, easy way to do it with your phone. And if you have an Apple or a Google phone, using the speech commands is an easy way to do that. But technology also includes things like calculators and your smartphones and your tablets, as well as the home assistants. And if you're interested, we can talk a little bit later about all the things that Google can do that help you. You can get up in the morning and have Google tell you what the weather is. I can't say the name of my personal assistant because she'll start talking to me right now. But I can say, Amazon thing, what are my appointments today? And if it's in the calendar, she'll read my appointments out. So there's loads of ways to use technology as reminders. And mind you, you don't need to have a brain injury to appreciate how those things work. And then there's cognitive art. There's things that you might use that are actually visual representations to help you learn or remember a concept. So on this one, I have 6 ways to a better memory. We can actually talk about those 6 ways to a better memory. But cognitive art itself is a card summarizing important information, and it could include a map or a floor plan. So it's anything that takes information and makes it visual, right? So now this 6 ways to a better memory is actually sort of good brain health, brain care. Okay, so one way that we can take care of ourselves and our brains is to do everything that you would do to take good care of your heart. So that means getting good exercise, getting good sleep, eating a good diet. All of the things that are good for your heart are also good for your brain. That's for a few reasons, because you have lots of blood vessels in your brain and you want to take good care of them. And when you take care of your heart, you take care of your blood vessels, but also because we know that exercise actually helps to grow new neural connections, and so does being active. So learning something new, especially if you're learning something new that includes a physical skill, like, table tennis or drawing, anything that integrates what I see and what I hear with what I'm actually doing with my body will actually help you to grow neural connections. And it helps to protect against memory changes later in life, but it also helps to enhance your cognitive functioning now. Now, I don't have to tell you, probably getting good sleep, eating right, and being with friends and meditating. Those are probably things that you've heard a lot about at all of the webinars that you've attended. But it's also important to challenge yourself. So finding new ways, new things to do is very important in keeping your brain healthy. So another kind of cognitive device are just environmental things that you put in your environment to help you to remember things. And it's a very popular thing. I love this thing. It's just a little piece of plastic that you put on your wall, and you use dry erase markers for anything that you don't want to forget as you're leaving your house, right? So you want to bring your library books with you. You have it posted straight there on the board. And you can see there's also a little door handle there. It's for a frequent reminder, take your lunch. Now, all of these things, you have to switch them up a little bit so you actually notice them. We tend to forget about or stop noticing things in our environment after we've seen them a whole bunch of times. But I like the fact that you can, erase and write something new or change the sign so that you're paying attention to it and you're remembering what you need to do when you need to do it. So signage is good. Wayfinding cues, like, little arrows that say, hey, go this way. That's another environmental cognitive support. If you find that you're in your house and you're doing different tasks and you find that you're, if you're, say, paying the bills or maybe cooking dinner or doing your crafts, putting all of the supplies for a certain kind of an activity together in one basket is another way to help you stay organized and hold things together. So the example that we have here is that little station that you can have right by your door that helps you to remember everything that you need that's important in the day. So this comes under the category of environmental, but as we're going to talk about, it also comes under the category of routine. So doing the same thing in the same way each time and having things in the same place each time really helps to make you more efficient. And now here's a big kind of a strategy, and that is metacognitive strategies. This is something that will probably take a little bit more time to talk about. Now, metacognitive strategies are cognitive compensations, but we also know that using metacognitive strategies can help grow new brain connections, and it can actually improve your performance in a lot of ways cognitively. So what metacognitive strategies are, metacognitive literally means thinking about thinking. So when we use these kind of strategies, what you're doing is you're taking a step back and thinking about, now, how am I thinking about this? And consciously talking to yourself or coaching yourself through a given activity. So here's a few examples of that: goal management training, problem solving, the stop and think, and mnemonic devices. So I'm going to talk through each of these things and then we'll stop again for questions. Does that sound good? Okay. So goal management training. Now, what is that? You might have, and I'm imagining that a lot of folks have already participated in this if you've done some brain injury rehab. It's a very popular evidence-based metacognitive strategy. But I know a lot of people, because I've been doing this a long time, they may learn this while they're in the hospital, or they may learn it while they're in clinic or in a talk like this, and not really use it as much in their day-to-day life. So we'll talk a little bit about how do you use this in your day-to-day life. So goal management training is very useful if you're saying to yourself, I don't get much done in a day. I'm not feeling very productive. It's useful if you're feeling stressed and you're overwhelmed and you're not sure, what should I be doing next? And then it's useful just because it's really useful. So I know that this is something that in one way or another, I do pretty much every day and every hour of the day. I'm stopping and saying, hey, what's my goal? Do I have a plan? Should I, and then I'll try to do my plan. And then I kind of review, how did it go? Is there something I should do differently next time? And I kind of store that away so that the next time I set that goal and make the plan, I know what to do. Now, it's important when we're setting goals to make sure that the goals are SMART. And a SMART goal is a specific, that's an acronym. when I expect to have it done. So when we think about SMART goals, it's very often I find people find it hard to set a SMART goal because we tend to think about goals as like, you know, I'm going to finish my university degree. I'm going to paint my room. Those are kind of big goals. I'm going to learn how to play badminton. Started. And that's where the revise comes in. You think about how you set the goal and you make a new plan if you have to. Another thing that we really use every day that's a metacognitive strategy, remember it's thinking about thinking, is problem solving strategies. And this becomes very important if after a mild traumatic brain injury or a even a more severe one, and you're having that kind of foggy-headed feeling. One thing that can tend to happen is that things that were very, very automatic now require a little bit more conscious thought. And so if you're in that state, stopping and thinking, do I understand what exactly it is that I have to accomplish? So it's a little like setting a SMART goal. And then how can I go about this? Sort of brainstorming, what are the alternatives for me to do? Creating a strategy, which is kind of the plan, and then coming up with a solution. So we use things like goal, plan, do, check, and problem solving strategies to get us going, to keep us on the mark, and to help motivate if you're having difficulty getting started. And at the base of all of this, any metacognitive strategy is stop and think. If I'm feeling anxious, if I'm feeling overwhelmed, if I'm feeling angry, the first step, stop, think, observe how you're feeling, and then proceed. So it's first getting a clear picture. So stop, and it's another acronym, STOP, stop, think, observe, and proceed. And that's another example of a cognitive compensation strategy. So before I start talking about mnemonic devices, does anybody have a question about cognitive compensation strategies? I just talked about the different kinds of ones. We have reminders, and we have memory aids, and we have technology, and we have metacognitive strategies as well. Does anybody have any questions about those?
So there's no newer questions, but there is, there's a question that kind of ties in with the topic.
Okay.
Is there any compensatory strategies for people with slow brain processing?
Yeah. So as we talk about it, and I will specifically get to some of those strategies, and we can talk through whether you think that they would work for you. One thing is that sometimes slowed processing is related to fatigue, and so making sure that you're very well rested. But very often what we have to do is slow people down. And so one of the compensation strategies is to actually ask questions, ask for clarifications. But we will talk a little bit more about that in specific.
So one member has asked, are there any brain memory cognitive exercises that you recommend?
There's attention training is not a bad thing if you can work with a therapist to do it. And that's, there's a couple of different kinds of exercises where you have to keep information in mind while you're doing the task. If you play with luminosity, they have one task in particular where you don't have to remember what the one they're showing on the screen. You have to remember, what did they show 2 times ago, right? And they call that the end back task. So you're not just remembering what flashed on the screen, but you're remembering what flashed on the screen before that or before that. That requires a lot of working memory. Another thing that requires working memory is mental arithmetic, and doing like, another fairly good one for is Sudoku. Now the thing about those is that as you're doing those tasks, realizing what it is that helps you to be more efficient at those tasks, and then using those strategies in other settings where if your attention isn't great, that you can improve your performance. Attention, you still have to think through, what is it that I have to pay attention better at, and how can I make that particular situation work better? So if somebody has an example of that, we can talk through that example. So those are the types, we talked through the types of strategies. Metacognitive strategies, I emphasized, are something that's very, very important, right? And a particular kind of a metacognitive strategy is called mnemonic device. So it's something that helps you to learn and remember information better. And that's something that I often get asked about. Now this stuff, it doesn't make your memory itself better. But what it does is it helps you to remember better because you're actually processing information more deeply. The more information that you take in while you're learning something, and the better you match it with what you already know, the easier it will be to recall. So even if the memory machinery in your brain doesn't get any stronger at all, you're still going to perform better in situations where you need to rely on your memory. So, of course, the first thing is write it down. Now, I know for myself that if I stop and I write my list down for grocery shopping, for instance, that even if I'm silly and I forget my list at home, I have a better chance of remembering what's on the list. Why? Because I used my hands, I stopped and thought, and I actually had to use my whole brain to integrate that information. So I have more connections now. Every time you learn something, your brain is making a new connection. So the act of writing it down can actually help you to independently remember it better. But of course, it's always better if you write it down and you read it, and you write it down and you read it, because the repetition of the information will help you to learn it better. Visualizing it. Now here again, instead of just hearing it, because you know, I'm horrible with this. I'll be at a party and I'll say hello, and somebody will say their name to me, and it's in one ear, not the other. But if I stop and I take notice of what's happening, and I say, Andrea is the lovely lady with the red hair and the pretty green dress on today, and I have a good look at her and think about it, I've processed the information more deeply, and it's more likely to occur to me. So visualizing it when I walk away, her name is Andrea, and this is what she looks like, and thinking about it. Now, another method of visualizing is if somebody tells you, for instance, to go to the store and buy some flour and some sugar and some salt, right? if you visualize yourself using those ingredients to make a cake, for instance, you're more likely than later to remember that information. Repeating information out loud is a really good one too. So the other thing that I do when I'm trying to remember somebody's name, or and we often hear people, or if I'm trying to remember a phone number that somebody's giving me, or even to write it down, is I repeat it out loud. I don't just listen to it, I say it. So, you know, Melissa's going to introduce herself to me and she'll say, hello, I'm Melissa Forrest. And I'm going to say, Melissa Forrest, what a lovely name. Melissa, and try and say the name a few times. That's going to make it more likely that I've processed the information and I'll be able to get it in. Another thing that you can do, if you really want to remember a situation or what's occurring, is to actually relate it to an odor. Because as it happens, our olfactory bulbs, or the cranial nerve that helps us to have a sense of smell, is sitting right up there in our frontal lobes. And it really has a lot of associative power. So you probably notice this if you take a whiff of something, and it will remind you of cookies your grandmother used to bake, or a place that you used to go, or flowers that you used to see. It's a little bit like hearing music. We often remember where we were when we heard the song, and that's because memory tends to get written in sensory packages. Focusing and concentrating makes a lot of sense. And so is chunking information. Like, you know, if somebody says a 7-digit phone number, right, with an area code, that's why they're chunked. You've got the area code 3 digits, the first 3 digits, the last 4 digits. It's chunked up for you, right? So another example of that is if you have a whole long set of instructions to remember, putting the first 2 steps together, remembering those, and then moving on to the next 2 steps and remembering those together can be helpful in learning new information. Associating the information one with the other. And then using flashcards, of course, so you can keep reviewing the information until you know it, and then you can kind of test yourself. Now, the thing about using flashcards is they work best if you don't guess. So if you don't get the right answer coming to mind pretty quickly and you're not really sure, don't guess, look, because every time you rehearse the information correctly, you're more likely to remember it. So the other thing that is really important, and I kind of saved this one for last, is learning how you learn. So knowing whether you're a visual learner or an experiential learner or an auditory learner, and then arranging your circumstances so that you're learning that best way possible. When we think about cognitive compensation, it really helps to be thinking about whatever cognitive task you want to do. It relies on the flow of cognition. And each one of these functions builds on the next. So we start at the bottom here with alertness. Now, you're not going to learn new information or a new skill or perform well if you're not alert, right? You have to be alert and awake, which means that at the very, if you want to improve cognitive functioning, you really have to be very careful about managing fatigue and doing what you can to sleep well. And then after you remember it, then you can use your executive functioning, your decision-making, your problem solving, your metacognitive routines to help pull everything together and function better. So how do you know if you have trouble with attention? Well, you might have trouble staying tuned in. You might gap out. I might be boring you. So you might be looking for something else to think about. Or you might feel restless or fidgety. What do you do? Whoops. So one thing that you can do if you notice that you're having some trouble with paying attention to what a person says is to consciously make eye contact. And then one thing that you can do is take notes on what's happening. Even if you don't use the notes later, stopping to write down an important point can help you stay focused. So you're going to kind of command attention, or command yourself to pay attention by really, really looking. Ask a question. So sometimes if you're having difficulty with paying attention, asking questions for clarification, and you can ask for that information to be given to you one point at a time. So you can slow people down simply by asking a question and then make it active. So repeat the information back, right? Or get a repetition by asking for a repetition. Rehearse the information, repeat the information. And if you're really very, very restless, sometimes people find that just having a little something in your hand to fidget with may help you to stay calmer and feel better. So you're going to remove distractions, you're going to repeat information, try to make notes, check if you understood, and then rehearse. So what about problems with processing information? So sometimes people, when they have a slowed processing, or they're not processing verbal information as well as they used to, might only hear a part of the message. So it's pretty common that you might hear the beginning, but not the end. Or you might hear the beginning and the end, but not the middle. So you might miss important parts of the information. I know that a lot of people, when you have slowed processing, time seems to go really fast. I know that's weird, but when your processing is slow, you wind up working on things, and then people say, "Come on, aren't you ready yet?" And you're like, "I've been working on it. I've been doing it." And it's also can be, you might notice that you get tired very easily because processing information is more effortful. A lot of times you may find yourself like pushing away because you don't want to really participate because things seem to go too fast, or you might just sort of get spacey. So those are all clues that you're having difficulty with processing information. So what can you do? And this goes to the question that we had earlier. The only therapy that sometimes can help with cognitive slowing, and for some people it's not a good idea, is stimulant medication. Some people take Ritalin, and the same thing that kids with ADHD do, to help speed up their cognitive processing. And it should only be done with a neuropsychiatrist and somebody who can help you to make sure that it's not going to interfere with making you anxious, and it's not going to interfere with your sleep or any other medicine that you're taking. And it's not really great if you have seizure disorder, but some people find that that is a helpful thing. And with cognitive slowing too, it's important to make sure that you're rested. Other than that, what you really need to do is to practice those cognitive routines that you're concerned about. And with practice, those particular routines will get more efficient and that you may be able to do better. So what you have to do is you have to think, where does my cognitive slowing get me into the most trouble? It might be, say, listening to a talk like this, or perhaps trying to answer questions in a class, right? So watching twice, preparing for that event might help you to perform better in that particular event, right? So if slowing you down, and this is something that we don't have to do much anymore, is like counting change or knowing if somebody gave you the right change, because a lot of us are using our cards right now. But doing mental arithmetic, if you practice the mental arithmetic and that routine, that cognitive routine gets really well established, then it will move more quickly and you will find that you're performing better. But you have to do it in situation by situation by situation. So most of the time, though, you may be in a position where you have to write notes. And sometimes just taking out a piece of paper and starting to write will slow people down because they know you're writing. And they know you. So if somebody's giving you instructions, say directions, to go to a house, if you stop and you put it in your phone or you write it down, you will have slowed them down and you'll get that extra rehearsal. Asking, wait, can you tell me that one at a time? That can help. And then asking for permission. And sometimes, or repetition. Sometimes it helps to, when somebody is talking a lot, to check in and say, did I understand correctly? And then give your understanding of what it was that was being said. Now, problems with memory. There's a lot of different ways that people can have problems with memory, but you might find that you're being inconsistent. Sometimes you remember to brush your teeth. Sometimes you forget in the morning, or you have trouble recalling events. You might have difficulty learning new information or difficulty following through, and that's prospective memory. Sort of, you decide that you want to do something, but you have trouble actually doing it at the end of the day. It's pretty common to have problems after brain injury with learning new information, recalling new information, remembering to do things in the future, having a memory for where and when you learned something, or a memory for context, and a memory of episodes that happened after the time of the injury. So just stuff that happens. Now, it's rarer, although it clearly occurs, to have problems with memory for faces. Most of us can remember things if somebody gives us a bit of a reminder. So you might not remember so-and-so's birthday party, but if I start to tell you about it, it may come to mind. Or if I gave you a list and I gave you some clues of what was on the list, you might be able to remember what was there. And that's less often affected. Procedural memory, which is learning a habit. So a lot of times when people have really poor declarative memories, or the ability to learn something and then remember you learned it and then call it back later, that oftentimes just by repeat, do it the right way, repeat, you can learn that same information as if it were a habit. And then also biographical information, things about yourself. We tend not to forget our birthdays, or even close family members' names, where we were born. That sort of thing tends not to be a memory problem. And that's because the things that less often show impairment are in parts of the brain that are less often injured, but it sometimes happens. So memory for faces can happen when some of the visual circuits that go from the back of the brain, the occipital lobe, to the temporal lobe have been damaged. But most of the time, depending on your injury, most of the time in traumatic injuries particularly, that part of the brain isn't injured. It can happen though. So what do? You write stuff down. That's, and when I say write stuff down, it could be in your phone, it could be on a pad of paper. But you also, whenever you write something down, you got to remember, like, how am I going to remember to look at that? You always have to ask yourself, am I putting this in the right place so that I'll remember it at the right time? repeat and ask for repetition, associate information. So ask questions and think about how what you're learning matches with what you already know, and then using strategies, notes, and reminders. Now, a lot of times people tell me that they have trouble with getting started or initiating. And what that looks like is that somebody doesn't seem like they're really motivated, or they might have goals, but they don't act on their goals, or they might need a lot of reminders or nagging to get going. And other people might say, oh, you know what, they're lazy. But the thing is that it's possible when we have a brain injury to actually have the part of the brain that gets you started damaged, and it makes it necessary then to have some support to actually initiate. But once you get going, you might have the abilities to actually complete the task. So what helps? Making sure that you have clear plans with small steps and SMART goals, that you have checklists with signs and prompts and routines, and that you use cues like alarms and calls and reminders. And a lot of times you have to switch it up. So your alarms might work for a while, but then you need to switch it up and have somebody call for a little bit and develop a new plan, because because the part of your brain that's having difficulty with initiating will start to get used to the cues in the environment. And with executive functioning, now with executive functioning, again, we're using metacognitive routines, those goal, plan, do, check, and problem solving routine. And then there's loads of them, good idea, bad idea, using those thinking about thinking routines to help you to get through with planning. And executive function also includes attention or mental control. And emotional control, so managing your own emotions, and also how aware you are of the issues that you're having. The biggest compensation strategy for awareness is to intentionally make time to reflect, what am I doing and how well is it working out? And so setting a goal for yourself, trying what you're doing, and then thinking in a very honest way with yourself, what did I do that worked? What did I do that didn't work? Will help you to have better self-awareness, and it will help you to move forward more effectively. So before I move to the next little thing, does anybody have any questions about these things that we just talked about?
Okay, so I have someone has said, having a set routine. How do you proceed when waking up and getting a shower is hard to do? So I guess that initial, first couple of steps, when that's a challenge, how do you overcome that? Are there any strategies?
Yeah, so if we go back to those first principles, right? You taking it one step at a time. So making it as easy as possible, because out of a nice toasty warm bed is hard, right? So one of the things that can help is making sure that you know why you're getting up and showered for that day, and having a reminder of that by your bedside, so that you know what the reinforcement is, you know why you're going to be doing it. So a lot of people will say, you know what I do is I really like to have my toaster waffle for breakfast. I enjoy that. It really feels good. And so when you wake up in the morning, you say, I have an appointment to go to today, and I'm going to get to have my waffle. So you have a reminder at your bedside to remember, or you can even get your electronic personal assistant to tell you that. And then the other really important thing is, don't think about the whole shower. Just think about, first I'm going to sit up and do that step. Now I'm going to put my feet on the ground, do that step. Now I'm going to stand up, do that step. By the time you're standing, getting in the shower is a lot easier. So breaking it down into those tiny, tiny little steps and having a clear idea, here's why I'm going to go and do that. That can really be helpful. And what I usually suggest is get somebody that you trust, if there is somebody around, right, to help you get in that routine by establishing, by doing a phone call the night before, and maybe for a week or two, a phone call in the morning. Hope that answered.
Thank you. So there are a couple of other questions, some a little bit off topic, but I know that these members have been waiting for a little bit. So I'm wondering, I'm going to give you this question.
Sure.
What is confabulation? Also, physically, which part of the brain is damaged to result in memory deficit, both LT and ST?
Ah, okay. I'm gonna skip ahead and show you a picture. Nope, I'm not, it's not there. I took it out. Did I take it out? Yes, I did. So deep in your nope, didn't, there it is. I'm gonna unhide a slide. And can y'all see that one?
I cannot see it yet.
All right.
I think you just have to share your screen again.
I have to share my screen. Screen. Oh yeah, because I did it by. There it is. I'm going to share the screen. Share. There we go. You see that?
We
Okay.
got it.
All righty. So deep in your temporal lobe, in here, there's a structure called, or a set of structures called the limbic system. Okay, can you see that one?
Yep.
And the limbic system is the emotional or feeling brain, but it also includes the hippocampus and the amygdala, and both are important in memory, particularly the hippocampus. Okay, and that makes sense because, and that's deep inside your temporal lobe. So what it looks like on the outside is right here, and then deep inside here is what we're looking at. And that's the middle part of the limbic brain, or the middle part of the brain. I'm not seeing a good picture of the hippocampus itself here, but it'd kind of be right here. And it looks like a horseshoe. So what that does is it's kind of like an index. Your brain has all sorts of, you have all sorts of sensory things that happen when you make a memory. And what the hippocampus does is it kind of ties them together so that they actually form a memory. So it includes emotional information, it includes what you see, what you feel, and the hippocampus says, boom, we're going to tie all that information together. Now, part of the information that gets tied together by your hippocampus is where the information came from, and or source memory. One of the things that can happen after a brain injury is that your frontal lobes, which are responsible for kind of stamping information with here's how and when I learned this, isn't functioning quite as well. And so what can happen is that you think of something and you can't really remember accurately whether it was just a thought you had or whether it actually happened, because you need your frontal lobe and a really good hippocampus to tie the right memories together and have them be there together, right? So one of the things that happens after brain injury often, particularly if the frontal lobe is involved, is that a person will tend to have part of a memory and then maybe they fill in the blanks with something that they don't remember. But from what they know, it feels like a memory. It feels like it really happened because you can't tell the difference because of your injury, whether it was a thought that I had, whether it was something somebody told me, or whether it was something that actually happened. And it can actually feel like a real memory. Now, here's the kicker. Every time you access a memory, you change it a little. So you make a memory, right? And that's your brain changing. It's a new connection in your brain. So every time you make a memory, your brain changes. And then every time you go back and remember something, the act of remembering it gets written into the memory itself. And so every time you have a memory, it changes a little. So it's pretty common after brain injury, especially like maybe you were in a coma or something, and then somebody said something to you and you get pretty convinced that something happened, and then you keep remembering that wrong memory, and it gets kind of stronger in a way, and it feels more like a real memory. Now that happens to all of us. And if you're a younger, I'm a younger sister. It happens, my older sister's here. And I said, we were talking about it, something that happened when I was a child. And I said, and I was standing up and here I was. And I have a very clear memory of it. And both my family members were like, that's not what happened. And they were sure of it. And son of a gun, if we didn't look at a picture, and they were right. But I really felt like I had that memory. And the reason for that is I went back and I was accessing that memory, and my little child mind changed it over time. And that felt real. So that happens to everybody. Our memories are not very accurate. But it's more pronounced, it's more obvious when your hippocampus or your memory index isn't working right. And when you combine that with a little bit of a problem in your frontal lobe, you often have a problem with source memory. Wow, that was a long explanation. I hope that was understandable.
I hope so. It was for me. It's
it's hard because I can't see faces.
I know. I also find psychology fascinating, so it takes me back to school.
Yeah, the brain is really cool stuff.
Yes.
It's really cool stuff. You can see like how in this side, you see how habitual behavior uses one part of the premotor cortex, like, and then it also uses a part of the brainstem called the posterior putamen. And then, but goal-directed behavior, when you're thinking about something and you decide to do something, that's a whole other thing. That's in your frontal lobe. So a lot of times if you're having a little bit of trouble with your frontal lobe, if you get the right routines, you can really compensate for that and still get a good result.
Thank you.
So sorry, Melissa, I'm
No.
jumping in only because I noticed there's a hand raised. So Jill, I'm going to allow you to talk if you want to ask Dr. Lemsky your question. And thank you for your patience.
Yes, your question was next.
Oh, was it typed in as well? Sorry, I'm only
Yeah, that's
watching the
okay.
hands.
I would prefer you speak, right?
Okay, so hi, Jill, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep, you're on.
I was pounded on my head for 20 minutes by dementia patients. How do I know what part of my brain was injured? Because nobody ever told me. I just lost my memory and they had to do memory games and stuff at Toronto Rehab.
Okay, so if you have a memory problem, what kind of an injury was it? What happened?
A dementia patient pounded me on the head and put me in a headlock for 20 minutes.
Oh, for
And in Emerge, they said I had lots of lumps on my head, but they never told me what area got injured.
Well, sometimes in an injury like that, it might not be a single place. Sometimes it can be, it's almost like, when you slosh the brain around, sometimes the connections, or it's like little axonal shearing happens. And it rubs up against the bony processes in the brain. So that would be the typical. Now, I don't know what happened to you, but that would be typical. And so sometimes instead of in one part of the brain, it's really the connections in the brain that are that might be sort of damaged in that circumstance. And sometimes memory suffers from that because the hippocampus, turns out, it's the greediest part of your brain. It uses the most glucose, it uses the most oxygen, and it's the most sensitive. It also has a ton of connections. And that's because it's taking information from all over the brain and wrapping it up in a memory. So very often when the connections are disturbed like that, the most common problem to have is is a problem with memory. I hope that answers the question. It's hard to know.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it's a good question for your doctor, actually.
Yeah. Only by phone and because of COVID.
Yeah.
That's what's important.
Yeah. I know, I understand.
Thank you, Jill.
I don't know if it was properly written in my notes either.
Well, sometimes if it was a milder injury, often you can't see the problem on CT or MR, the scans. But the most common problem would be with the connections. And the good news is that kind of an injury will heal fairly well if you don't have other risk factors. Oh, that's my
Ooh.
I may have to go to general.
Thank you.
Does anybody have another question?
Yes. So someone is asking, does infrared and red light therapy help, and where would we get it?
You know what? I have never seen any data for infrared and red light therapy. The idea behind infrared therapy for muscles and stuff is that it increases circulation, and the increase in circulation helps with healing. And to my knowledge, it isn't clear. There aren't good large studies that say that really helps with brain healing. But I'm not the last word on that, honestly. I just haven't heard of anything.
On the same note, another member has asked also a question about vision therapy. Is there any evidence on the effectiveness?
You know, in the last year, because I've been working with more folks with mild traumatic brain injury, I've been looking more into vision therapy. And my experience with clients is that they do say that it helps quite a bit. That they find that their eyes sort of, well, two things happen. The exercises help them to focus a little bit better, but then they also learn how compensation strategies in the process of doing the exercises. But it's like physiotherapy. You get taught the exercises, and then you have to do them. And so it takes a bit of commitment, and it takes a bit of stick-to-itiveness, because the progress can be, it's not instant, it's not fast. It's like rebuilding muscles and rebalancing muscles in your eyes. And that part of it, I do believe, is very effective. There are some physiotherapists that do it, and there's some ophthalmologists who do it. And mild TBI clinics now are doing more of it. But I've had a lot of people tell me that it's very helpful. It's helpful with nausea and balance issues, as well as blurry vision, and particularly if it's like blurry vision when I get tired.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh, look at
That is all of the questions.
Right on time. That was pretty
Yes.
fantastic.
Oh my goodness.
That never
we have-
happens.
How perfect was that?
The time went really quickly. Thank you so much. This isn't a topic that I usually talk about, so I really appreciate everybody's patience in going through it with me. And hopefully I picked out some useful things to talk about. Your questions were fabulous. They were insightful, and I know a lot of people have a lot of curiosity about things that would help with brain injury. New therapies that would help with brain injury. And I just wish I had all day to read about those things.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, as always, with us. I don't think we mentioned this in the beginning, but Dr. Lemsky is obviously has lots of credentials to her name, but my favorite one is that she's a BIST board member. So we're very fortunate to have Carolyn on our board of directors as well. So if you come out to the AGM, or any of our future events. Once we're back in person, you'll have a chance to chat with her there as well. So,
And I will just look forward to that so much, like everybody else is.
yes, yes.
Mhm.
And just so you know, Carolyn, there's some lovely thank yous in the chat, and someone just said, "I love this woman." I do too. And of course, thank you to Robert again, and to PIA for sponsoring this event. If you want to see more, I'm just going to do a shameless plug here, shameful plug. I'm not sure if I'm saying it right, but our BISC's abijustice.org site has 2 videos featuring Robert Ben and some of the work that he does and talking about working with individuals he supports with ABI. So I encourage you to check those out as well. And sorry, Melissa, I'll leave it to you to close out the evening.
That's okay. There's a whole bunch of thank yous in the Q&A box as well. Everybody has thoroughly enjoyed tonight. Thank you so much, Dr. Lemsky, for coming out tonight. It's been an incredible evening, so dynamic and so informative. So I really appreciate all of your help and support tonight. And I look forward to seeing you the next time. And thank you to all of our members for coming out for tonight's ABI Info Series. And our final and 5th ABI Info Series will be next Monday at the same time from 6:30 to 8. So I hope to see you all there. Have a great night.
Great. Thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.
Before I go, great job, Melissa.
Thank you, Melissa.
We're still live, but have a good night. Bye.
You too. Bye for now.